All right, so today's topic is kitchen math, but in order to learn about kitchen math, we first have to know all of the terms that we're talking about when it comes to kitchen math. And unfortunately, all of these different vocabulary words, they actually have abbreviations to make them shorter because chefs are lazy and they don't want to write out the full word. So before we get started on the actual math and numbers part of today, we do first need to understand what these words are and how we abbreviate them properly. So up at the top of the page, our first section is looking at what are these abbreviations. So the first word is cup. We can write cup for short by simply writing the letter C. For tablespoon, there's actually two different abbreviations we can use. So we could use TBSP, or we could also just write a capital letter T. And technically, we should be punctuating each of those with a period. I don't always do that, but that marks that that's the end of the abbreviation. For quarts, we're going to use QT. Pint is similar, and it's just a PT. Dozen, we could abbreviate as DOZ, but what's even more important about a dozen is that we recognize that that is equal to 12. That's not really something we're going to do a lot of math of today, but when a recipe says that you're going to make a dozen cookies or a dozen cupcakes, it's important that we know what that dozen word means. And then the very last one for this column is degrees, which is the little circle, and then Fahrenheit, which is just the letter F. Now, in the US, we only use Fahrenheit as our term of measurement when we're talking about temperature, but you may come across some recipes that are written in other countries that use Celsius, and so you might see that F or C, which tells you whether we're talking about Fahrenheit or Celsius and whether or not you have the correct temperature for your ovens here in the US, or if we have to do some fixing to figure out what the proper temperature would be. In the next column, teaspoon is very similar to tablespoon, so we can have TSP as an abbreviation, or we could also just use a lowercase t. Gallon is going to be GAL. Pound is kind of a funky one, but that's LB is the abbreviation. Doesn't make sense for the English language, but the Latin word for pound does actually have an L and a B in there, which is where that comes from. And then our last two are fluid ounce and ounce. So for fluid ounce, it's going to be FL for fluid, OZ for ounce. And we'll use that when we're talking about a liquid. And then ounce itself is going to be OZ. And we're going to use that when we talk about a solid. So we would say that there is a certain number of fluid ounces of something like water or milk, or that there's a certain number of ounces in something like flour or chocolate chips or whatever. It's super important that we understand all of those abbreviations because you may see it written out as the full word or as any of these abbreviations when we're looking at a recipe or any other documents for class. And we have to know what those different abbreviations mean so we make sure that we measure them properly. You can go ahead and find the next video so that we can start doing some math.